go. Okay, so the portion today is Tavo. One more person coming in, and as usual, if you have anything to say, just unmute yourself. Just 1 second. Let this person come in. It's Gay Bieber. As usual, just unmute yourself to ask a question, or go to chat down on the bottom of your screen and type a question or a comment that will appear on the side. So like I said, the portion is Tavo. It's on page 1140 in the Eitz Chaim. Or whatever edition Chumash Bible you're looking at, you wanted to be at Deuteronomy chapter 26, the beginning of the chapter. So there are two things I want to do today, and the first is something that I just finished studying with my Chavruta, my study partner, Rabbi Ethan Seidel. So he biked here, and now that he is retired from Tiferet Israel, he wants to get his biking in. So he's going to keep biking out here as opposed to me driving down to him. So we met this morning, and we just started studying last week a book called Eish Kodesh, which means literally holy fire. It is a collection of commentary on the Torah portions by a rabbi from Poland who was killed in the Holocaust, Rabbi Kalonimos Kalman Shapiro. He lived from 1889 to 1943. Killed by the Nazis on some march or something else outside of Sobibor concentration camp. He was the Grand Rabbi of Piaseczno, Poland. So he writes this Eish Kodesh, which is really at times very poignant and very sad about, how to believe in God, how to understand the Torah in the time of the Holocaust, when great trauma is happening to the Jewish people. How do you understand the Torah portion, especially this week's Torah portion, which has in it a series of blessings that we will experience if we follow in God's ways, which raises a major theological question in the time of the Holocaust. If you're believing in God, why are these terrible things happening to us? So his comment, the few thoughts I want to share with you from him about this week's portion is actually from the second Aliyah. So if you turn to page 1142, or chapter 26, beginning with verse 12, or whatever edition of the Chumash, just look for where the second Aliyah begins. This is how it goes. When you have set aside in full the 10th part of your yield in the third year, the year of the tithe, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat their fill in your settlements, right? So you followed the mitzvah. You're in the land of Israel. You're collecting the produce. You're setting aside the tithe, the maaser, the tithe that you're supposed to do, and set aside an extra tithe sometimes in the third year for the Levi and also the orphan and the poor, essentially. Anybody who needs it, you set aside. Everybody in Israel is supposed to set aside 1/10 of their produce in that year, so that there should be more than enough to take care of people in Israel who are poor, who don't have land, or whatever condition they're in. They just don't have the means to take care of themselves. Okay, so you've done this. Then verse 13, you shall declare before the Lord your God, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from the house I have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, just as you commanded me. I have neither transgressed nor neglected any of your commandments. Right? So there's a formula, you say, after you set aside this tithe. It's not done anymore. Still, even though Jews are back in the land of Israel, really setting aside this tithe isn't done in this way anymore, because part of it has to go to the temple in Jerusalem, and there's no temple. Verse 14, the formula continues, I have not eaten of it while in mourning, I have not cleared out any of it while I was impure, and I have not deposited any of it with the dead. Right? I kept it set aside, hekdesh, as holy, set aside portion for this mitzvah. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done just as you commanded me. Now, verse 15 is what Rabbi Kolonimos commented on. Look down from your holy abode, from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the soil you have given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to your fathers, or to our fathers, or to our ancestors, if you want to be gender neutral. So he chooses this verse to derive the following comment. I'm not going to go through everything that's in this comment. It's the book looks like this in the Hebrew, right? And it's essentially 2 full columns that he has about this verse. Essentially, his point is the following. The verse is telling us Moses is saying to God, or saying on behalf of the people, this is what we want to say. We set aside the tithe. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're following the commandments to the letter. Now we pray that God will look out from above and give us the blessing as God promised God would do. Okay, we did our part of the bargain. We hope and pray that God will do God's part of the bargain. Okay, so now here's the thing: that what Kolonimos does and connects this to the Holocaust. He connects this to experiences that the Israelites experienced back in Egypt before the Exodus in Egypt. And he's describing supernatural things. So that the suffering that the Israelites had at the hand of the Egyptians was against the laws of nature. That, in other words, Kolonimos points out, many animals of prey, animals that hunt in order to survive for food, do this for pleasure. That it's just part of the natural order that animals do this. But snakes do something extra. They bite, and they don't necessarily eat what they bite. So in nature itself, Kolonimos is pointing this out from the Talmud, right? He's not making this up. It's midrash from the Talmud. There are animals like wolves and lions that attack and then eat. And that's just the natural course of things. That's the way nature works. But then there are snakes that are evil for not their own sake. They just bite because they bite, and they're not eating what they bite. Like Egypt, like Pharaoh enacted a decree just for the sake of being evil, as opposed to any kind of benefit. Told the Israelites, because Moses came and had these demands, that Pharaoh said, now you have to gather your own straw, right? If you want the Israelites as slaves to make bricks, then you want to try to provide the supplies. You can work them hard as slaves, but all the material is there. But now you're going to ask the Israelites extra evil to get their own straw. That's going beyond. So the evil was going beyond the natural course of events. And then God responded with the plagues that were outside the norm of nature. And Israel, the people of Israel, suffered in a way that they were not, like, they withstood the suffering in a way that that most people are not able to withstand the suffering. So there's normal suffering, and then there's this extra ability to withstand suffering that the Israelites had that resulted in plagues being brought on their behalf outside the course of nature to save them from the suffering. So what Kalonimos is suggesting to his flock who are suffering at the hands of the Nazis are like the snake, doing extra evil because they're doing the evil, not because of any kind of benefit on their part. They're being evil for evil's sake. And we Jews in the Holocaust are suffering beyond the pale. And because we're suffering so much, we ask God, look down from your holy abode. So back to this verse Kalonimos is suggesting. We ask God, we have withstood suffering beyond most people's ability to withstand suffering. So look down from your holy abode. Just two more people coming in. Look down from your holy abode and bless the people of Israel. Okay, and that's a fascinating lesson that Kalonimos is adding for us, that we might not have necessarily learned from the portion itself. So for a basic reading, for those who just joined, I was just reading the second aliyah of this week's portion, Ki Tavo, which is Deuteronomy 26, verses 12 to 15, about fulfilling a mitzvah. You're fulfilling the mitzvah of setting aside the tithe, and we're praying to God to look out from above and provide us with blessing. And I just shared the teaching from a rabbi during the Holocaust to fellow Jews suffering at the hands of the Nazis, how extra poignant and powerful this prayer becomes. Here we are suffering at the hands of the Nazis. We are suffering in a way that is more than the average person withstands. There should be some benefit that we get. We are willing to withstand the suffering, Kalonimos also adds. We're willing to withstand the suffering, and we ask God to look out from God's holy abode and bless us and save us. So Saul, go ahead, unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, as far as I know, snakes, they're afraid that you're going to attack them, and that's why they bite, not because they want to eat you. And right. It could be the same with wolves. So that's how the Nazis looked at it. They saw the Jews as going to ruin their way of life.
So yes, I would agree that the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud don't necessarily understand all the ways of nature and the ways of animals. So for the purpose of a midrash, they are willing to just have a quick observation of the world around them and derive a lesson from it. And their point is that the lion rips apart its prey and then eats it. The wolf rips apart its prey and then eats it. The snake doesn't do that. The snake bites because God had commanded it to bite. So that, in other words, back from the Garden of Eden story, the punishment of the snake for giving the fruit to Eve and then Adam to eat is that God said, you are going to, you're doomed to slither on the ground and to bite people's heels. Okay, so In other words, so the snake, whether it's doing it naturally or not, the point for the midrash is it's doing it because God had commanded to do it. So again, I was just summarizing Kalonimos's lesson here for the point of that leads to the suffering that the people of Israel had at the hands of the Egyptians and at other times in history. And we are withstanding the suffering and taking it all. And the prayer then is that the suffering is beyond the normal kind of suffering, and we're asking God to relieve us in a beyond the normal kind of way of relieving us. So that's Kalonimos's lesson about this. So this lesson of if we fulfill a mitzvah, we expect to get a reward for it or to be acknowledged for it is extended by Kalonimos in this theological way and suffering way to the Holocaust. So I just wanted to share that. Do you have another comment, Saul, about this with your hand? No. Okay, so you can lower your hand. I'll lower your hand. Elizabeth, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Just a question.
Yeah.
So, with what you just said,
yes,
that we're willing to withstand this abnormal suffering.
Yes.
Beyond what normal suffering is,
right?
Which is bad enough. And then we ask for a above and beyond normal
response,
blessing or
right.
Some type of reward. So in other words, like the way you're saying it sounds the suffering is a mitzvah. I'm confused.
So
that because of this mitzvah, then we should be receiving a blessing.
Right. So the idea behind the suffering that Kalonimos is suggesting is it's an extra suffering. Like there's kind of normal suffering. If you're stricken with a cold or some kind of virus or something like that, that's expected. You're going to suffer in that way. But suffering at the hand of evil that goes on for an extended period of time, that suffering is not the usual kind of suffering. And Kalonimos is pointing out that the Jews of Europe who are suffering at the hands of the Nazis are trying their best to withstand it, and he's preaching to his Hasidic followers. Okay. So not the average Jew of Europe, a secular Jew who is in a concentration camp. He's preaching to his fellow ultra-Orthodox Jews who see life in a very black and white kind of way, and that's literally from what they're wearing to their religious outlook on life. I follow the commandments, therefore I should be rewarded. I don't follow the commandments, therefore I should be punished. If I am punished, therefore I am doing something wrong, therefore I have to fix my life, do teshuvah, or it could be also if I do a reckoning of my life and I recognize that I am still doing good and I am suffering, then God is causing me to suffer, and I have, in an ultra-Orthodox traditional perspective on understanding good and evil, then I take in this suffering as it's coming from God, and I'm willingly suffering.
Okay.
However, the normal kind of suffering would be like out before the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, not during. The normal suffering would be people die, you have loss of income, business, that kinds of things are tremendous trauma in life, and we withstand that according to this traditional understanding of good and evil. willingly, understanding that someday we will be rewarded, and even if it's not in this life, we'll be rewarded in the world to come. But in the Holocaust, where it's an much extra layer of suffering, we therefore ask, based on, and he's using our verse from this portion, please God, look out from above and act in an abnormal way. The suffering is abnormal, therefore the blessing, the escape from the suffering should be abnormal. That's what he's saying.
So, yeah, so I was just trying to understand where is the mitzvah. So I do understand it now, that if you are willingly,
yes,
you're willingly allowing to the suffering, and
you're not allowing it, you're accepting it.
Withstanding it.
Yes.
Withstanding it.
Yes.
With the help of Hashem.
Yes.
So there's the mitzvah.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I wouldn't call it a mitzvah. I mean, there's no mitzvah in accepting or understanding the source of the suffering. It's rather it's accepting this religious approach. Okay. So for the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud, to very Orthodox people today, this is what's expected. If you're going to be this kind of Jew, this Orthodox traditional Jew, then that means not just observing the commandments in an Orthodox way, but understanding the Orthodox perspective on good and evil. So you got to buy into the whole package. And you have to not just buy into it, you have to accept it, and it has to be part of your being. Okay? Gabe, unmute yourself.
So it's really sort of a matter of using your free will to accept this extra layer of suffering?
So the question of free will, right. The question of free will is from the rabbis is trying to make sense of when the good and evil equation doesn't work out. Okay, so in other words, the good and evil equation that should work out is I follow the mitzvahs. Like what our portion is saying today, I just set aside my tithe like I did. I recite this formula, honestly and truly doing it the right way. Therefore, I should receive a blessing for doing this. Or just in the words of the second paragraph of the Shema, if the community fulfills the covenant, all aspects of the covenant, then the rain is going to come at the right time. And if we don't fulfill the covenant, all of it or parts of it, then the rain will come at the wrong time. But of course, the people could be following the covenant and the rain still comes at the wrong time. So that's the question of where free will comes in, or how to understand when nature or when events don't happen according to the religious framework that the Torah and the rabbis have set aside, have taught. Okay, when life doesn't work according to the religious lessons the way it's supposed to work, how do we make sense of that? Okay, so one way is to understand that we have free will, that we have the opportunity to choose whether we're going to do good or bad, and we have the opportunity to choose to repent, and that means that we can. That instead of the world following a specific script that God has laid out, there's room for us to ad lib in that script, both for good and for bad. And there's also the understanding, so there's the ad libbing part, which could explain some of the reasons why bad things are happening to us, because we have chosen not to follow the script and not to follow the covenant. The other part of it is, who are we who live on earth for at most 120 years to question God who is infinite and eternal? So something that might not make sense to us today, like why did our brothers and sisters, 6 million of them, perish at the hands of the Nazis? Who are we, the religious perspective on this would ask, who are we to question God? God, it's even 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, who are we to think that we have the right to question why the Holocaust happened? That's not for us to question according to this traditional theology. God has God's answers, and either the answer will become known or it won't. So these are the traditional ways, the Orthodox ways to understand good and evil. They're not my ways for understanding them, because it just doesn't work for me. And I've explained that to you, to the congregation in sermons on the high holidays and other classes that I've taught, that this just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't. I understand and appreciate that this theology, or this, it's really technically theodicy. When theodicy is about understanding good and evil in the world, theology is just understanding God. So this theodicy just doesn't work for me, and I've come up with a theodicy that does work for me, and it's not me that's coming up with it, and who am I, Jonah Layman, to come up with a Jewish theodicy? It's by conservative rabbis who have taught and written, like Abraham Joshua Heschel, like Harold Kushner, and others like that, that help me be the religious person I am in a different non-Orthodox way. Jan, unmute yourself.
So I just kind of peeked on another screen and saw a little bit more about this rabbi in the book, because you definitely sparked my curiosity.
It's available in English translation, by the way.
So this is what I'm reading is actually from the Torah school. And so I'm reading, it's English, but it tells a little bit about the background about how the book kind of came together.
Yeah.
So Warsaw Ghetto, they were kind of digging and finding stuff, and they found this pile of manuscripts, and they figured that this actually had been like his Shabbat, his notes for his Shabbat sermons. And so if you kind of think of it from that perspective, they're in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was given an opportunity here, do this to escape, and he said, no, I don't want to do this. I really need to be here for my people, and encourage them and be their guide and help them to have faith. And if you look at it, that what he was writing in some senses was to try to help the people in this awful situation to try to have faith, to like wake up tomorrow, as opposed to just giving up.
Absolutely. Yes. So, so I was talking to my friend, to Ethan, about this. Imagine what would he have taught had he survived the Holocaust and that miracle didn't come, right? So he's teaching in this sermon. He's probably teaching in a bunch of other sermons in this collection known as the Eish Kodesh, the Holy Fire. He's trying to inspire and provide hope and faith to his congregants, who already have bought into the system, the Orthodox system, but even the Orthodox would be questioning God's ways by, suffering typhoid, dysentery, the tremendous death that and famine and starvation that's happening in the Warsaw Ghetto. Like, why are we supposed to be Jewish under this? Right? So you can imagine Rabbi Kolonomos's job, how difficult it is to try to help his followers, his congregation, maintain faith. And then, so what would have happened had he survived the Holocaust what would have been the miracle or the blessing, like would the Allies' invasion of Normandy, right? Would that have been the blessing, the miracle from God? Would the establishment of the state of Israel have been the miracle from God? I mean, I'm sure he would have found some way to say, yes, God did look out, right? Verse 15, God did look down from God's holy abode and did bless the people of Israel. So I'm sure Kalonimos would have found a way to do that. Yes, Gabe. And
Is this a particularly Hasidic worldview?
yes, absolutely. Whether it's Hasidic or ultra Orthodox, you know,
But not Mignognic.
It's what?
Not Mignognic.
Well, it could be. It could be that, like the Misnagdim and the Hasidim, it's kind of hard to tell them apart today because they all wear the black coats and the black hats. But their theological perspective is the same. They're just how they live their Jewish life might be a little bit different in terms of the amount of singing in the service or not. But the theological perspective is the same, whether you're whatever kind of ultra-Orthodox you are. Yes, Elizabeth.
That is what I was told when I was a kid, when I first learned of the Holocaust, and I was upset by that, didn't understand why this could happen. I was told that in order for us to get Israel, that the Holocaust had to occur. That's the simple answer I was told.
Right.
That this is why Israel came into being, because all these people needed to be sacrificed. And I didn't understand that either.
Right.
It didn't make sense to me.
Right.
And it kind of made me feel like, why would God do that? Why would he be so mean?
Exactly.
You know, but that is the answer I was given.
Yeah. So it's not just the answer that you were given. It is a common answer in some Jewish circles today. And that's why I cannot see this traditional approach with the answer that the state of Israel is the answer to the Holocaust. Just does not make sense to me, for the very reason that you get. Why would 6 million people need to suffer and die in such cruel, horrific ways in order for the state of Israel to be established? That doesn't work for me. So I'm not going to get into my theology and my theodicy now. Just don't want to do that. I just wanted to point out who Rabbi Kalonimus was and how he understood this verse in a way that we might not have necessarily understood it based on the straightforward reading of the text. Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to do today. The other is just to take a look at the very beginning of the portion, because this portion, the beginning is found in the Haggadah. And frankly, it's a part of the Haggadah that not everybody reads. It's that long section of Midrash that is after the youngest sings the 4 questions, and before we get to dipping the wine from the cup and reciting the 10 plagues and singing Dayenu. So in between is that long section of Midrash, and I think that's what it is. That's where it falls. But anyway, many people skip it, and often I skip a lot of it too. But it's all based on this one section here. So when you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. Okay, so the Mishnah, I've talked about this before. The Mishnah describes this. This is what Shavuot is, Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of the first fruits. And the Mishnah in the tractate Bikurim describes how this was done and the pageantry around it as people from all across the land of Israel were gathering their first fruits and bringing them to Jerusalem to offer them up to God. So the Mishnah describes the great parades that would happen around the holiday of Shavuot as the people were bringing their first fruits. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. The Mishnah also describes how people, the baskets that people would bring these fruits in. And of course, the wealthier people would have very elaborate and expensive baskets. And the poor would just have plain wicker, woven baskets. So poor people who brought the first fruits were intimidated by the wealthy to the point where the rabbis decreed that everybody, no matter what their wealth, has to bring in a certain kind of basket so that the poor won't feel bad and that the rich won't be ostentatious about it. Okay? It's just one of those examples of many that it's like getting married. It used to be that all brides would wear the same kind of dress. So that because there were certain wealthy brides that would be ostentatious, or with a wedding ring. Don't have a wedding ring that has stones on it, because if you say that you have to have a wedding ring with gems on them, then an average person might not be able to afford it. So everybody should get married with a plain gold, plain band that's worth at least 2 prutas. All right, so just another example of lowering the bar so that everybody can be equal in celebrating the mitzvah. So the priest shall take the basket from your hand, set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Verse 5, you shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God. And this is another thing too. The person bringing the fruit has to recite this paragraph. So used to be that the Kohen, there's some people who are knowledgeable of the prayer would then show off and recite it just like that. Other people would be stumbling over it. Other people didn't even know it at all. So what to do with the people who didn't know it at all? So then the rabbis also said to be inclusive so people don't feel intimidated or don't feel like to point out how uneducated they are. Everybody, whether you know it or not, is going to be prompted by the priest to say this. So in other words, you do one phrase at a time. Arami oved avi, the priest said, and then the person would say Arami oved avi, right? So in other words, like a president taking the oath of office, a president might have had memorized it, but still you're going to respond to the chief justice one phrase at a time. Also under the chuppah, I always tell bride and groom, don't memorize Harayat Mekudeshet Li or Anila Dodi Vadodi Li. Don't bother memorizing it, because even no matter how good you are at memorizing it, you're going to be nervous under the chuppah and you're going to stumble over the words. So don't worry about it. Just repeat after me. So this is same idea to ease the anxiety of the people bringing the basket, to not feel intimidated about being in the temple in front of a Kohen who you may never have seen before in your community, because the Kohen is in the temple and you're in this holy of holy places. So a very intimidating, anxious, stressful time. Kohen says, prompts the person. And now, what does he say? My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our plea, saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand. by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place, gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, O Lord, have given me. Okay, so this whole paragraph is in the Haggadah, and phrase by phrase, there's midrash on this throughout that section of the Magid section of the Haggadah. But so the aspects of it, I just want to, it's just, I think it's interesting that when you're bringing the first fruits, it's one thing, it's like reciting a blessing over the food that we eat, and especially getting back to this discussion that we had before we started recording about people with their gardens and bringing in the fruit from their own garden, how good it makes you feel to be working the land. You might feel proud of yourself for being able to produce the food yourself from the ground. And reciting a bracha over food you eat, food we eat, not you, all of us, recognizes that no matter whether the food that we're eating, we actually made ourselves from baking the bread or plucking the vegetables and the fruit from the ground or from the trees in our own backyard. No, that we don't recognize that it's only us that caused this food to appear on our table. It's thanks to God's providence that the food is here. In partnership with God, we create the food. So the same thing when you bring the first fruits of your orchards or your fields to the temple in Jerusalem, don't think that it's all your work. You have to understand that it's thanks to God and God's blessing to provide this bountiful land, this fertile land, and this bountiful harvest. And we also put it into historical context. Thank God we made it here to the land of Israel to be able to experience this bounty because we could have been stuck in Egypt as slaves in Egypt. So it's interesting that Mount Sinai isn't listed here in the history. It's slavery in Egypt to the land of Israel without the 40 years of wandering in between being mentioned there. But still, it's the idea of the lowest of the low is a slave, and the highest of the high is being able to work the land of Israel, the holy land of Israel, as the holy people of Israel. So any thoughts or comments about that? So this section is Arami Oved Avi, again, is a famous section, and it's usually translated, my father was a wandering Aramean. Here it's a fugitive. The word Oved means lost, and that's why it's usually means wandering, but it could be, it could have this sense of being a fugitive, like a runaway, as opposed to just wandering aimlessly. Okay, so, all right, so we'll end here for today. I just wanted to point out these two sections from the portion Ki Tavo. This week, we have Bar Mitzvah on Shabbat. So the Bar Mitzvah family will be in the synagogue. We're going to be live streaming instead of Zooming the service on Shabbat morning. And tomorrow, we have a first time that we're doing this, a coffee hour at 10 o'clock in the morning, just to schmooze and catch up with anybody who's interested in doing that. So the first Thursday, we have a coffee hour. We have Minyan tonight. And I hope everybody stays healthy and stays well. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.